Stephen, Alan, Bob, how does it feel to be millionaires?
You go first.
Bob, you're probably used to the feeling, so you don't have to answer this one straight away. But Alan, why don't we ask you first?
Well, my house was already worth more than $1 million, so it's irrelevant, actually.
The amount I get out of this, Bruce, is not life-changing. It's nice, but it's not life-changing.
The money was nice, but it wasn't the main motivating force. I'm actually working much longer than I ever expected. So my finances were organised for a retirement around 65.
For me, just on the money, for me it's really a matter of being able to live just the way I've always lived. It doesn't change my life at all, but perhaps to do it a bit more comfortably.
But the money would have to be part of the attraction, wouldn't it?
Of course.
Yeah, for us, though, Bruce, I think it's worth saying that the people inside the business, so the employee shareholders, if you like, we had a kind of different view towards this transaction than our financial investors. We didn't, Alan said all the way along, we didn't build this to sell it, and we didn't. But when you've got financial investors and someone comes knocking very loudly, you've got to listen to them. And when they put a serious price on the table, you've got to respect the fact that there are investors in there who need to turn on their investment. And so there's a certain amount of regret about the fact that this is our first part of the journey's ended, but a bit of excitement too about what the next bit looks like.
I interpret that rightly or wrongly, that means that the money men drove this, that as journalists you would have preferred to have stayed independent, but because the money men wanted to kind of get their money out, they drove the process. Is that fair?
That's saying it a bit bluntly, I guess. But the fact is that when I started Eureka Report 7 years ago, the money men, so-called, John Wiley and Mark Carnegie, did put the money in, right? They backed me. They backed my vision for what we were creating. And it was fantastic that they did. And for that, they owned 2/3 of the business between them, and I got 1/3. That was the deal at the time. Now, obviously, over time, that's kind of diluted. We've brought in other people like Bob and Steve. But nevertheless, those guys and Eric Beecher, who they also brought in, became financial investors. So it is true that they want a return on their investment. But the other thing is that once they became more sellers than buyers, it meant that we had a constraint on where we were going to get capital from. I mean, they probably would have given us capital, but maybe they wouldn't because they wanted to sell. Particularly if the three of us, knocked back a decent bid. They wouldn't be happy. They're not going to just kind of be inclined to give us more money when we need it. So really, the only way the only way we could continue on and to provide the service we're currently doing and to grow the business was really to just link up with a big organisation.
So I'm no financial whiz, but was a float ever considered?
It was possible, but the market conditions aren't ready for that. We couldn't possibly float at the moment, and maybe in a few years' time. But really, the opportunity was now. We had Fairfax and News Limited both looking to buy us, and so now was the time to look at that.
What do you say to people who reckon you've not just sold, but you've sold out?
Well, I've got a 3-year contract with News Corp, and the others have got 4 years. Can I say that a really important motivating factor for me was the fact that when I joined this group, the situation was that we didn't have a lot of capital. We had enough capital, but it wasn't a vast surplus of capital. But behind us, we always knew that John and Mark would put extra funds in if it was required. It turned out not to be required. But once they became in a different mode, then if we ran into a downturn in the economy with a tight capitalisation, we could get ourselves into real trouble and have to raise money at a very low price, virtually wiping out the current equity. So when journalists start a business like this and develop it like this, you are dependent on the capital sources that you've got. And we did it, Alan particularly, did it this way. I must say it worked extraordinarily well, but we'd reached a new situation. I didn't particularly want to sell, but I saw danger there, that I saw real danger to the total enterprise in certain circumstances. And so in that situation, I did become a seller.
So are you saying, Bob, that if you didn't move now, there was a chance that the business would fail?
Well, it might not exactly fail, but it'd certainly have to raise capital at a very low price, which would make my capital and Alan's and Steve's virtually worthless, because we just have to raise the money at what price we could. And And that was not the situation, say, a year or 2 years earlier.
Alan, you've written on independence, and I'll just quote a piece that you wrote, Why We Sold AIBM. We remain passionately independent of commercial interests, but being part of a global media company will give us the support and resources to grow the business. Now, how can you be passionate about independence and then join a global media company?
We're independent of commercial interests, by which I mean advertisers, financial product producers, when it comes to Eureka Report. News Corporation is a media business. AIBM is a media business. I mean, I don't think, as far as I can tell, advertisers don't decide what goes into News Corporation newspapers. You know, as far as I can tell. All media businesses have an arm's length relationship with advertisers. And that's what I meant. That's what we have, that's what we'll continue to have.
And what about News Limited or News Corp's greater commercial interests? Aren't you in danger at least of being seen to be ultimately serving that rather than your readers?
Well, we can only demonstrate, I guess, that we're not. But look, the business is owned by News Corporation, that's true. We are employed by News Corporation. And we're aware of News Corp's reputation.
What is that reputation?
Well, I mean, obviously the phone hacking scandals in the UK have kind of highlighted some issues around what's going on with the company, and they're terrible. It's terrible. I mean, the people who are responsible for that need to go to jail.
I've worked for News Corp. I work with The Australian, and under Chris Mitchell and David Armstrong. I've had no editorial interference at all. I found them to be, in Australia, to be very straight. And so I was actually more relaxed about joining News Corp than the others because they hadn't worked there. So, and we have the additional situation that Kim Williams has become the CEO. I've known Kim, and I know Alan and Steve have, and we've known him for some years. We've talked to him about things. We're very comfortable with him as a CEO. And really, they've bought this business. We trade on our independence, and if they were to interfere with the business, and I don't expect they will, but if they were to, they'll in fact they'll do it damage. So I wouldn't have signed up for a 3-year deal if I thought that they were going to cause a problem on the independence front.
Well, that's certainly true of me. I mean, I did my cadetship at News with The Australian. And strangely enough, Rupert never picked up the phone to me when I was a cadet. But it is true that they have bought Business Spectator and Eureka Report for what they are. They value them. They paid a lot of money. The last thing they're going to do is destroy the value, I would think.
Have you got a job to convince your readers of that? Stephen, I'll just read you some of the comments that were made in response to Alan's piece. And it indicates a fair bit of, scepticism amongst your readers. Alan, I think your definition of independent must have changed. You would cringe and probably criticise anyone else attempting to argue independence in similar circumstances, wrote one of your readers. Another one said, congratulations on setting up AIBM and Business Spectator and making them such a success, a true achievement. Commiserations on losing all your credibility in one fell swoop. Now that suggests quite a lot of disillusionment, Stephen. Has that been reflected in subscriptions, cancelled subscriptions, since the announcement was made, or...?
No, and maybe it's too early for that to show itself up, if indeed it does show itself up. And you're right, there's some trepidation amongst some of our audiences about the change of what it might mean, but the proof of the pudding's going to be in the eating. It's what we do. It's demonstrating independence of thought and action. And I think that, point Bob made a bit earlier, News Limited's going through a huge change. It's got a new leader. Kim Williams is a significantly different sort of character to the old News Limited team. He's purging the place. He's changing the culture. He's changing the structure. We know him really well. We've got no reason to not trust Kim when he says that they will keep us at arm's length, that we will... As Bob said, he's paid a lot of money for not just our mastheads, but our brands. A core part of the value of this business lies with Alan and Bob and me. And they've actually capitalised that into the sale price and locked us up for some years. So it wouldn't be rational for Kim to pay that money and then go and trash the place.
Raises an interesting issue. Bob, would you have done this deal with John Hartigan?
Yes, I think John's a great guy too. I didn't know John as well as I know Kim Williams. I think that he kept the Australian News Corporation business outside the sort of situations that we ran into in London. But I didn't know John as well as I know Kim. Can I say about affecting our business? It so happened that our deal was announced on the Wednesday, and on the Thursday and then the following Saturday, we had 500 at Melbourne and Sydney Eureka readers. And I went around and mixed with them personally. And it's true that some of them were a bit edgy and unhappy about the fact that we'd sold to News Corp. But I think overall, and some people said they were not going to renew. Not a lot, but some. But overall, what they wanted to hear from Alan and from me, because I write for both, was that, hey, we're going to continue doing what we've done in the past. You know, the most fascinating, the criticisms, hey, we think the Eureka's a bit exclusive. If News Corp's promoted too far, too many people will get it. So there was that was part of it as well. But yes, we've got to actually tell our Eureka readers and our Spectator readers that we are independent and we have to act independently.
Given your history, both yours, Bob, Stephen and you, Alan, very distinguished contributors to Fairfax, wouldn't Fairfax have been a better fit, Alan?
Well, we did a sale process when the information memorandum went out to a number of parties. About a dozen parties expressed interest in receiving the information memorandum. There's a number of people still interested in going on. It came down to Fairfax and News in the end, and our first inclination was to go with Fairfax, and we entered an exclusivity period negotiating only with them, with Fairfax. And so for 4 months we negotiated with Fairfax exclusively, and in the end we couldn't make a deal work for various reasons. One of them was price, but not only that. And at the end of that period we went back to the other bit of News and started talking to them. And the difference was fantastic. I mean, News was very, very easy to deal with in terms of our independence and our position going forward, working for the business, as well as price. They were fantastic.
Is it true that there was a price put on the table and then Fairfax rethought that price?
I suppose that's one way to put it. I mean, there was a price that we put on the business to begin with, which Fairfax, in the end, felt it was unable to pay.
It's worth noting, by the way, that at the end of the process, we actually rejected the offer they had on the table, because there's been things said and written about that process and our businesses. And the reality was we said that what they put on the table wasn't sufficient.
I should say here, I mean, Greg Highwood is an old friend of mine, and I really admire what he's doing. I think he's doing his best with Fairfax, and I really wish him well. We're sorry that we're not part of them, but that's life. I think they're doing the right thing, and they'll be a formidable competitor to News Corp, I think, editorially at least, and see how they go commercially.
I was excited by the Fairfax bid initially because they were looking at putting some other assets into our business. And I thought perhaps that might be a good way for us to actually go to the next stage quite rapidly. But the complexity, those 4 months that Alan talks about, it went on and on. And at the end of that, I thought, much as I wanted to join them partly because of those assets coming in, at the end of it I said, no, this is not where we've got to go. This is going to drive me mad. And yes, the price was obviously clearly a factor. They were too low. But I was actually relieved in a way.
Alan, the past comes back to haunt all of us. I'm going to read you a quote. In 2005 you wrote or said, News Corp is nothing but a badly performing business, mostly run by untrustworthy people. Murdoch is a disgrace. Is that still your view?
Well, I think it was poorly run in 2005. It definitely was. It's better run now. It's obviously performing fantastically well. The company's killing them. It's great. I mean, most as a whole company.
Is Rupert Murdoch still a disgrace?
No. Look, I've always been the sort of writer who is out there. I've kind of I've expressed myself robustly over the years, and he probably.
So you'll apologise to him when you see him?
If I see him, I won't apologise. But you know, if he wants to have a chat about that column, well, I'm happy to talk about it.
Have you gone back to your old column, Stephen, and done a word search for words like disgrace? And
I'm not as intemperate as Alan is, so I don't think I've got too much big concern. But in relation to what we do in future, in relation to news, I wrote a column today about news, and I wrote exactly what I would have written last week, or last month, or last year, or 10 years ago, in terms of the approach I brought to it. The only difference in terms of that column to what I would have done 2 weeks ago was that I said to Alan, I've written a column about news, because Alan's editor-in-chief and he deserves to be forewarned before something goes on the site. But other than that, there was no self-censorship in that.
Rupert obviously read that and probably remembered it. And yet News Corp, with his permission obviously, bought us. And I think that tells you something about a difference in this company that is, I find hopeful, that they will in fact buy somebody who clearly will say those sort of things about them. Now, I'm not suggesting that Alan would say that again in this situation, but I can imagine newspaper proprietors, when somebody wrote that about them, they would never, ever even contemplate buying that group. And yet News Corp did. And I think that tells you something, that this is a group that is really looking to change its image and has in fact been affected by the events in London and affected in ways I don't think we fully appreciate.
but Bob, you've expressed concerns over News Corp governance in the past in some of your writings. I mean, do you think they've addressed that issue appropriately?
I think in terms of us, I've got no problems with that at all. They've done it very well. I had no problems with News Corp governments when I was at the Australian, as far as I was concerned. Look, News Corp is a family company, or has been a family company, dominated by the Murdoch family. And that is starting to change, simply because Rupert has got very old. And so it's a new company that's going to emerge. They're announcing that they might split the company. There's all sorts of things taking place within this company. Now, that was going to happen anyway, simply because you can't live forever. But I think the events in London have accelerated the way News Corp do things. And they've, as they would any company that's been through the sort of exercise that they have in London, will look at its navel and look at itself and say, hey, how did we do these things? How did these things go wrong? And I'm totally certain that that's what's happened at News Corp.
I do think it's a credit to Rupert Murdoch that when Kim Williams picked up the phone and said, I want to buy this company and employ Alan Kohler, Rupert didn't say, absolutely not, ever, never hiring this bloke.
He does have a history of forgiving that, doesn't he?
Well, I mean, it's because if you're in the journalism business, you have to. I mean, you know, if you dish it out, you've got to take it, you know. And I think that Rupert is a journalist in many ways.
Not sure he's going to forgive me, but anyway, that's another issue. What did you think?
You wrote a whole book.
What did you think of Kim Williams' announcements last week, particularly the coverage of those announcements in News Limited publications?
I would have preferred to have seen a less of a cheerleading coverage in the News Limited papers. I guess there was, you know, I personally would prefer companies, new publishers, to cover themselves straight and not, not in a cheerleading way, I guess.
And you'd have to acknowledge that Fairfax tends to do that sometimes to their detriment, don't they?
Well, maybe. I mean, you mean that...
as a former editor with both editors...
They're too sceptical about themselves, you think?
And sometimes they're too willing to criticise management and, you know, as a former editor, both of us...
Look, I think it's very difficult to get it right. I mean, it's a really tricky area, I think. But, you know, as an editor... I mean, I was editor under Conrad Black. I mean, he was...
So was I.
As you remember, he was particularly interested in that stuff, you know, and if anyone criticised the company, he'd be running you like a ton of bricks. And so there was quite a lot of angst at the time, which we had to defend as editors.
Yeah. Stephen, have you got any thoughts on that?
Oh, look, I agree with Alan. I thought that was a little bit too gushy and positive. But I come out of the Fairfax environment where the Fairfax journalists are far more looking for opportunities to be ferocious towards their management.
Bob, is that true that at Fairfax they tend to go looking for reasons to be ferocious towards management, and at News Limited they tend to look for reasons to celebrate management?
I think that's probably true. In the past, but I'm not sure that the Fairfax of the future is going to be like that. This is a company whose share price has fallen dramatically, and when that occurs, there's a limited amount of punishment you can take, and suddenly the actual existence of the company comes under threat. Now, when the share price of Fairfax is $5, then of course that's what you do, and that was the Fairfax tradition. But if you go back far enough, if you go back into the days of Max Such, we weren't allowed, when we wrote about Fairfax, we had to submit our copy. We could write about anything else we liked, but Fairfax copy had to be submitted. And so the traditions that have come out more recently are not all the way back. But I think you'll find with Fairfax that they will tend, they need to spruik their situation because of their share price. And you may see under this new management quite a different situation to what you've seen in the past.
One last question for you, Alan, particularly, but you're welcome to come in on it. Stephen and Bob, should you still be allowed to appear on the ABC in your current roles?
Obviously, there's a bit of a range of opinion about this. Well, I've said many times, I keep saying it, that when I started the ABC, I worked for Fairfax, did so for 7 years while working at the ABC. I was a contractor at both organisations. Everyone was happy, no problem. There was a bit of noise about it on Media Watch from time to time. And then I started my own business, Eureka Report, media business, no problem with ABC management. And now I'm back and I'm with another organisation and also with the ABC. So look, I've never worked for the ABC only. I've always worked for somebody else, sometimes my own business, sometimes another large organisation. And I'm not the only one who does that. The ABC management are very happy with the arrangement. People are entitled to their opinion. I don't fully understand the conflict of interest claims about it. I just don't really get it when if you really examine it. I think it's easy to fling accusations around, but when you get down to it, what is the problem? And I don't think there is one. But to be honest, if there was a problem for me, there will be a problem for Philip Adams, who works for both organisations. Gerard Whateley works for both organisations. I mean, there's obviously a few people, and and I presume that that if something happened to me or they drew the line with me, then that would affect the other people as well.
I guess the difference in the Gerard Whateley and the Philip Adams is that they're not analysing the functions and performance of their companies, their principal employers, which you're paid to do, and I guess that's two hats that sometimes sit uneasily, isn't it?
Well, News Corporation is a listed company, that's correct. Yeah. And occasionally it will go, I'll report its share price on the news, that's true. So that's an interesting question. If I report News Corporation's share price, do I need to disclose that I work for them? I don't know.
Maybe advice on that. Maybe it's principally a question for the ABC.
Well, it is. I mean, obviously, if I was to interview someone from News Corporation, I would have to fully disclose that I work for them. I wouldn't actually interview them. I wouldn't do it. I never interviewed anyone from Fairfax on the ABC while I worked for Fairfax. I won't do it with News Corp. It's just too hard.
One final question, maybe for you, Stephen, and you, Bob. If we do this interview in 5 more years, if we come back in 5 years, what will Business Spectator Eureka Report look like?
Well, hopefully I'll still be here.
Hopefully I will still be here.
It'll be 12 months after the initial contract ends. If it goes according to plan, Business Spectator will be significantly larger, have much more depth. It'll be a much more mature product, have a much larger audience, and be commercially very successful. And when I say much larger, I mean much, much, much larger than it is today. Eureka will have an audience that's 2 or 3 times what it is today. That's our ambition. And hopefully there will be other products in there, in that suite of products that we manage.
And Bob, if Rupert goes ahead and splits news into 2 divisions, which division will you be sitting in, the entertainment division or the publishing division?
I think I will be in the publishing division. I think we've actually started something here that can really go. It needs capital, and that's what we didn't have. And I'm in the business of, I love building businesses. I did it with Fairfax, and now I'm doing it with our own group and with News Corp. I enjoy being part of that. And that's really why I'm still here, in part. I enjoy the interest of building Spectator and Eureka. And okay, we've got a new owner. I'm signed up for 3 years, and in 3 years' time, if my health's okay, I'll still be going, and because I enjoy it, I really do.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, Bruce.